Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The Right Honourable Mia Amor Motley, QC, MP, Prime Minister of Barbados. The keynote speaker for this evening, Professor Emerita, the Most Honourable Violet Eudine Barriteau, FB GCM, Order of Grenada, Gold Award for Excellence, and Professor Emerita of Gender and Public Policy in the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the University of the West Indies. Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. Andrew, Dr. Rommel Springer, JP, NP. Patron of the Ermie Bourne Foundation and former Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. Andrew, George Walton Payne, QC. Chairman of the Ermie Bourne Foundation, Mr. Simeon Belgrave, JP. Trustees of the Ermie Bourne Foundation, President of the St. Andrew branch of the Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Paul Griffith. Executive members of the St. Andrew branch of the Barbados Labour Party, the St. Andrew Parish Ambassadors, Mr. Tremaine Trotman and Ms. Peter Watson, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and I welcome you to the most beautiful parish in Barbados, the parish of St. Andrew. It is my honor to welcome you, and to welcome you to the 5th session of the annual Ermie Bourne Memorial Lecture. Permit me an opportunity to share with you the story of the legacy of Dame Edna Ermintrude, or Ermie Bourne. Born on August 4th, 1918, educator, social worker, humanitarian, Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, created history when, on the introduction of universal adult suffrage, she became the first woman elected to Parliament. Dame Edna became deeply impressed with the labor movement and the work of that legendary hero, Sir Grantley Adams. Having promised her father to take over from him and to look after the poor of the parish and the underprivileged, Dame Edna continued along a path of political development and resulted in her returning as senior member for St. Andrew in 1951 and 1956 general elections. Her entry into Parliament was heralded by one of the largest crowds assembled to see any member of Parliament at that time. This being 14 years after the 1937 riots, a time of continuing social change and removals of the evils and hardships afflicting the people of St. Andrew. It was against this background of achievements and her representation of the people of St. Andrew that Dame Edna, along with the rest of the Grantley Adams government, laid the foundation for modern Barbados. for her service to this nation, Dame Edna Ermie Bourne has been knighted, and the ever-popular East Coast Road named after her. The Ermie Bourne Center, headquartered in Hillaby, St. Andrew, has been established in order to ensure that her achievements are not lost to younger generations of Barbados. In 2018, as part of her centennial celebrations, the Ermie Bourne Foundation was established as a memorial charity trust, honoring the stewardship of the late Edna Ermie Bourne, the first female parliamentarian to win the election in the House of Assembly in Barbados. As we continue to celebrate her life, we are now gathered here for the 5th session of the annual Ermie Bourne Memorial Lecture. Today's lecture is entitled, "The Values of the Village, Preventing Social and Economic Annihilation in Contemporary Barbados," and is presented by Professor the Most Honourable Violet Eudine Barriteau. It is at this time that I am honored to introduce to you two young persons who have been working tirelessly over the past few months on their parish project entitled From Ruins to Prestige, Restoring a Piece of Our Heritage, to restore, preserve, and beautify the remnants of the old train line located right here in Belle Plaine, St. Andrew. The train line was completed in 1883 and decommissioned in 1937. Although the vast majority of the train line is gone, it has not been forgotten. The pillars that still can be seen spanning the Long Pond River gives us but a glimpse into the past and examples of the ingenuity and architectural practices of our forefathers, who did not have the luxury or means to go to a cement factory for construction, but instead resourcefully utilized materials from around the area to construct these pillars. While in the past, those pillars would have held up the railway, allowing the train to pass over Long Pond River and into its final destination, today and going into the future, it is our vision that they will hold up the expected tourism and economic revolution that will certainly come to St. Andrew, as we as well foster a love for heritage and the environment throughout the parish. At this time, I would like you to assist me in warmly welcoming to the lectern the male and female parish ambassadors for St. Andrew 2022, Mr. Tremaine Trotman and Miss Peter Watson, to deliver the official welcome. I thank you.
Good evening, and welcome to the 5th Annual Ermie Bourne Memorial Lecture in the tranquil parish of St. Andrew. This year's theme is entitled, "The Values of the Village, Preventing Social and Economic Alienation in Contemporary Barbados," which is a fitting theme, not only considering the past few years of the pandemic, but also because of where we find ourselves this evening at the Allen School, whose motto is Alice non sibi, which means for others, not self, a quintessential village value. That selfless, kind act of giving a stranger a meal or a glass of water because you see how hard they are working, or just as a good gesture. It is this value of selflessness that we are taught from an early age, and one which every person who wishes to take part in public life should strive to adopt.
Few politicians embody this village value quite like Dame Ermie Bourne, who was devoted to transforming this constituency and all those who lived in it, through unrelenting debates in the House of Assembly when it came to matters relating to her constituency. It is this kind of passion that is needed to transform and develop communities in St. Andrew once again, and I am sure today's speaker will delve into how and what is needed to be done to achieve this. With that, we once again welcome you to this year's annual Ermie Bourne Memorial Lecture, and we do hope you enjoy.
It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Kimar Hines, who will be introducing our keynote speaker for this evening. Kimar Hines is an emerging Barbadian youth leader, an activist pursuing a background in management studies with a concentration on international business and project management. He was awarded a sports scholarship at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus in 2020, where he also was elected to serve as the chairman of the National Affairs Committee in the following year. Kimar is a prominent member of the St. Andrew constituency branch and is deeply immersed in culture, people, activities, and work in the constituency. He is also a member of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and the St. Andrew Community Disaster Response Team, where he can be often seen in the field or lending his voice to conversations of environmental issues such as climate crisis and advocating for climate justice. Kimar appeared as a featured speaker at the launch of the Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust and the Caribbean Climate Justice Project called Climate Action Global Youth Accelerator, which also featured speakers from Liberia, Malawi, St. Lucia, as well as Barbados. Kimar has been recently featured in Caesar's Voices podcast on sustainable development and education. He is eager to develop new, innovative, and sustainable management practices to aid the parish of St. Andrew in building out its own ecotourism product and preserving its rich history and heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Kimar Hines.
Good evening to all. I am truly humbled and delighted to have the distinct honor in today's proceedings of introducing the keynote speaker of the 5th Annual Ermie Bourne Memorial Lecture. Dame Edna Ermita Bourne was a woman of many firsts to her name, and similarly, our keynote speaker, a regional and international feminist scholar who also has many firsts to her name, to deliver this prestigious annual lecture. Professor the Most Honourable Violet Eudine Barriteau is a Grenadian-born Caribbean feminist scholar and activist with a distinguished record of accomplishments in research, executive administration, educational leadership, national and regional public service, and advocacy on behalf of women. She is Professor Emerita of Gender and Public Policy and past Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, a post she held from 2015 until 2021. In 1988, Professor Barriteau founded the Women's Forum of Barbados, a public policy pressure group which mounted educational and outreach programs on demolishing societal barriers discriminating against women and lobbied against governments to change policies adversely affecting women. Professor Barriteau was the first woman at the University of the West Indies to be appointed campus coordinator of the School for Graduate Studies and Research, before becoming the second woman to be appointed deputy principal at the Cave Hill campus on August 1st, 2008. On August 1st, 2014, she was appointed the second principal of the UWI Open campus, before assuming the principalship of the Cave Hill campus on May 1st, 2015. She's also the first woman to lead the Cave Hill campus and the first woman at the University of the West Indies to be appointed Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of 2 campuses. In 2019, the Barbados government appointed Professor the Most Honourable Eudine Barriteau lead organizer of the inaugural Gender and Development Forum of UNCTAD 15, which was later hosted by Barbados in 2021. This was the first UNCTAD ministerial conference to be mounted in the Caribbean. Professor Barriteau has spearheaded a number of path-breaking initiatives at the UWI. She served for 15 years as the first head of the Center of Gender and Development Studies, Nitobara Unit, where she successfully built the Institute of Gender Development Studies at the Cayfield campus, offering undergraduate minors, masters, and PhD programs in gender and development studies. In 2017, she launched the Smart Campus Initiative, designed to reconceptualize the delivery of higher education, goods and services in Barbados, and the Caribbean by harnessing ICT technology to support national and regional development. In 2018, she proposed and established at the Cayfield campus the Center for Biosecurity Studies, the only of its kind in the Commonwealth Caribbean. In October 2019, the UWI approved the proposal developed by Professor Barriteau for the establishment of a Faculty of Culture, Creative, and Performing Arts, which was inaugurated on Emancipation Day, August 1st, 2020. In 2021, Professor Barriteau established a UWI University of Ghana approved preclinical medical degree program for the training of Ghanaian students. Professor Barriteau is renowned for her extensive publishings and presentations and has served as an advisor and consultant to governments and international agencies, including CARICOM, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and UNIFEM. Her research interests encompass feminist theorizing, gender and public policy, women's political and economic participation, women's leadership, gender issues in higher education, feminist investigation of the Caribbean political economy, and theorizing heterosexual women's socio-sexual unions. For her outstanding service and pioneering women's educational leadership in the region, Professor Barriteau has received many honors. These include the Order of Grenada Gold Award for Excellence, the Order of Freedom of Barbados, the Gold Crown of Merit, and the 10th CARICOM Triennial Award for Women. Outside of her professional endeavors, Professor Barriteau is also the proud mother of a son, Cabral Fanon Barriteau Foster, and grandmother of Aliyah and Amari Barriteau Foster. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the distinguished keynote speaker of our 5th annual Ermie Bourne Memorial Lecture entitled The Values of the Village, Preventing Social and Economic Alienation in Contemporary Barbados. Please welcome Professor Emerita, the Most Honourable Eudine Barriteau.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, for that very generous introduction. Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honourable Mia Amor Motley, Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. Andrew, Dr. Rommel Springer, Patron of the Ermie Bourne Foundation and former Member of Parliament for the constituency of St. Andrew, Mr. George Walton Payne, members of the family of Dame Ermie Bourne, Chairman of the Ermie Bourne Foundation, Mr. Simeon Belgrave, and trustees of the foundation, President of the St. Andrews branch of the Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Paul Griffith, executive members of the St. Andrews branch of the Barbados Labour Party, St. Andrew Parish Ambassadors, Mr. Tremaine Trotman and Ms. Peter Watson, ladies and gentlemen, specially invited guests, and for those of you who have braved the weather to be here, good evening. I am truly honored to have been invited to deliver this year's public lecture in honor of Dame Edna Ermintrude Bourne. Dame Ermie Bourne was a distinguished Barbadian woman who blazed the trail for women, the people of St. Andrew, and all of Barbados. As we know, Dame Ermie created political history in 1951 when she became the first Barbadian woman to be elected as a representative of the Barbados Labour Party in parliamentary elections. She was knighted in independence honors on November 30th, 1995, and immortalized with the naming of the Ermie Bourne Highway on August 23rd, 1996. What I find most appealing about Dame Ermie was her unswerving commitment to improving the circumstances affecting the lives of all her constituents, and by extension, all the working people of Barbados. In the words of St. Andrew's current parliamentary representative, Dr. Rommel Springer, Dame Ermie understood the vital importance of community development, whether it was infrastructural development, such as improving roads and bridges, repairing and expanding the existing housing stock, lobbying for and ensuring the provision of a much-needed Belle Plaine social and community center, or ensuring constituents, especially women and the elderly, had access to family planning and community health care. Dame Ermie offered dedicated, desirable public service. In the 2018 Ermie Bourne Centennial Lecture, Dr. Springer noted, and I quote, "Her values were not only her own, but represented the shared values of countless numbers of disenfranchised and voiceless Barbadians. She was in every sense the voice of the voiceless," end of quote. I dedicate this evening's lecture to the legacy of Dame Ermintrude Bourne, and I have titled my address, "The Values of the Village, Preventing Social and Economic Alienation in Contemporary Barbados." I have two main objectives in this lecture. First, I wish to reveal the unstated assumptions and examine what is meant or implied when the concept of the values of the village is used. And second, to indicate where our energies and resources should be placed if the country intends to correct what is assumed to be the result of these missing values of the village. In the past 3 months, across the country, on the call-in radio programs, in newspaper columns, in courthouses, and in conversations, there are references, anecdotal stories, and admonitions about what is socially wrong in Barbados and what is necessary to fix it. A variety of solutions are offered, but overwhelmingly, there is an acceptance that there is an evaporation of the values that once defined Barbadian society, and these are often described as the values of the village. I am intrigued by this. In their frequent referencing of the disappearance of the values of the village, commentators focus on the norms and values of a bygone era to address what is essentially a 21st century phenomenon: the deeply problematic and dangerous actions of some persons. Their violent, disruptive, and illegal actions reflect alienation from the acceptable norms and standards of civic life. Barbados in the third decade of the 21st century is vastly different from Barbados of the mid-20th century, the Barbados that Dame Ermie Bourne experienced as the first woman parliamentarian. In the 1950s, the majority of Barbados's population would have lived in urban or rural working class communities, with those in the more rural parishes experiencing even greater challenges for transportation, potable water, electricity, and equitable educational and employment opportunities. And I want you to think of 1950s Barbados in that regard. Jobs would have been confined to the narrowly defined parameters of agricultural, clerical, and service work for the majority of the able-bodied seeking work or indeed working. 5 years before Dame Ermie was elected, the labor force of Barbados was 90,200 with 10.9% unemployed. In the 1950s, employed persons certainly would not have experienced the diverse range of employment opportunities that now exist today. Table 1 shows the employment by sector for 1960 and 1978. Employment by labor force sectors then fell into only 8 categories. As you can see, 1960 and 1978, 8 categories. As shown now in Table 2, by 2019, labor market occupations were now in 16 industry classifications. That is 2019. So you see the change from 8 to 16. However, do note that employment in seven of these areas were very adversely affected by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. We should also note that though employment in education, right here, may have remained relatively steady, and I emphasize may have, because anecdotally there are stories of teachers taking early retirement, although just in today's papers, the heads of the 2 teachers' unions say nothing exceptional. So the numbers employed in education may have remained the same in spite of the pandemic, but I have to emphasize may have. The same cannot be said for full attendance of students in schools. This is an unknown quantity for which the Ministry of Education, Technical and Vocational Training needs to be certain of, and a need to reassure the country of those numbers. The 2022 labor market is correspondingly very sophisticated with a diversity of highly specialized occupations. Figure 1 shows a steady rise in members of the labor force with at least a post-secondary education between 1999 to 2004. In 2022, educational opportunities abound. These educational institutions are from pre-primary to university level and include a wide variety of highly specialized post-secondary and tertiary training, the kind that you would not have had in the 50s. Women enjoyed a higher level, as you can see there, of post-secondary educational attainment, but as Table 3 shows, men maintain a higher employment numbers in legislators, senior official managers, technicians, and associate professionals, while women had higher numbers in the broad area of professionals. The housing stock has grown significantly, even though it is still inadequate in meeting the demands for affordable housing. The national demand has been underscored by Member of Parliament and Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, Mr. Dwight Sutherland, who publicly pledged the government's commitment to build another 10,000 homes in 5 years. The housing market, of course, spans every income level, from individually rented rooms, the National Housing Corporation units, through to basic starter homes. Middle and upper income residential areas included gated communities and luxury villas for Barbadians and visitors alike. Let us be clear, ladies and gentlemen, the living conditions and harsh social and economic realities defining village and communities of the 1950s Barbados no longer exist today as they did in the mid-20th century. We can thank successive government administrations for cumulatively eradicating many of the socio-economic conditions that bedeviled the existence of Barbadians 60 plus years ago. Yet, there are indications that worrying social challenges are on the ascendancy. If these are not contained, the social cohesion, which has been a defining feature of Barbados and for which the country is well known and widely admired, would become increasingly fragile. In fact, one of Barbados's underrated assets is its social cohesion, which in turn reproduces social stability. The government and citizens together have to ensure that we introduce or strengthen all appropriate strategies to protect and enhance the well-being of the country. These strategies should be anchored in social policies that recognize the rapid changes in Barbadian society. Table 4 shows that Barbados is witnessing a growing and worrying trend in gun crimes and the use of guns for execution. When I was constructing that table, within the last 2 weeks, I had to keep changing this. All forms of violence are abhorrent, destructive, and shocking. These murders are cold-blooded, appear to be pre-planned, and overwhelmingly involve young men ruthlessly killing each other. These murders indicate the existence of a subgroup of primarily young men who are alienated from the normal conventions of the society. As a result, this upsurge in gun and physical violence, the continuing worrying trend of domestic violence, particularly intimate partner violence, the physical and emotional abuse of children, the public discussion that young women who are wards of the state are in distress, and the impatience of some young men and young women to want to improve their economic circumstances, some it seems by any means necessary. All of these recent developments have left many Barbadians disturbed and shocked at what appears to be the fraying of the social fabric of the country. Mr. Dennis De Pisa, General Secretary of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados, C2SAB, states, and I quote, "The recent spike in shootings present a concern to public safety, and the Mia Mottley administration must take concrete steps to address the worrying problems," end of quote. Professor Dwayne Devonish of the University of the West Indies adds, again I quote, "Barbados is on the precipice of a public health crisis related to gun violence and gang war." Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones, Executive Director of Caribbean Community Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, CARICOM Impacts, weighed in. He advised, "You cannot attribute it to the high cost of living. It is just that there is no foundation. There is little respect for life." And he went on to add, "It was a lack of morals and values at the core." So let us examine the concept of the values of the village and social cohesion. Now, whenever the country is provoked by social challenges, the concept of the values of the village is invoked by commentators searching for solutions to the problems the country is confronting. They look back to a beautiful past where morals and values prevented social disruption. So let's take a closer look at that. Let us examine 7 questions about what is stated and what is left unsaid when these commentators prioritize the morals and values of the village as a bulwark against social implosion. And the first question, where is this proverbial village besides our nostalgia for it? And where does this proverbial village currently exist beyond its psychic invocation? Are commentators referring to geographical residential classifications existing in both urban and rural Barbados? Do they mean Belle Plaine, Brighton, Boscobel, or Britons Hill? Do the villages include Baker's Woods, as you know, in St. Peter, or Bannister Land of Martindale's Road in St. Michael? Or are these commentators referring to a time when conditions were harsh, but Barbadians in villages looked out for each other? We have to consider it. Are these commentators suggesting, and that's a very serious one, that many of the social ills we face arise in village communities, whether urban or rural, and therefore the solution should come from among the residents themselves? Why is it that in times of social crises, it is either draconian punitive measures, lock them up, hang them, put them in prison, or throw away the key? It's either that or the values of the village that are invoked as being necessary and required to save the country. More critically, are there any values and morals in the heights, terraces, villas, and gated communities? Just asking. What are these sets of values that define the village? The discussion suggests that if only Barbadians clung to the values of the village, then we would not have young men shooting each other to death, domestic violence, rebellious teenagers, child abuse, and teenage girls being locked up in state institutions. All these would be features of the past. Instead, the country would have social cohesion and peace in communities. Now, historically, a village housed low-income, urban, or rural working class, closely knit communities where people worked extremely hard to survive wearisome social and economic conditions. What is implied by the concept of the values of the village can be described as a web of mutually shared social obligations that seem stronger when persons were forced to depend on each other forced to depend on each other for survival. Mutual collaboration facilitated mutual economic and social survival, and persons experience the benefits of maintaining that web of social and economic engagement for cooperation and community well-being. With the creation of a larger middle class from the 1960s onwards, and I showed you how occupation categories were expanded, so the evidence of more sophisticated labor markets with a wider range of employment opportunities, supported by the widespread availability of post-secondary and tertiary education options, has that culture of community cooperation been gradually eroded? The class dimension of these communities, these villages, is never explicitly stated. But a village was a community of overwhelmingly working class persons. Not only or exclusively, but overwhelmingly. The problems of deviance, delinquency, criminal behavior never seem to arrive in middle-class communities because it is never discussed as a problem of middle-class communities. Therefore, the village is also accorded reference to working-class communities, whether urban or rural. It is tempting to hark back to the wonderful halcyon days of bucolic village life when peace, love, temperance and contentment reigned, and even when materially, persons may have had very little to be contented about. It is never explicitly stated, but instead implied that people accepted their social station. Elders were respected. Propertied persons were respected. Teachers, policemen, and civil servants were respected. And it seems that the preeminent value of the village was respect. In fact, the currency of the village was respect. And in this telling, when the persons who narrate this looking back, respect, fear of God, and acceptance of one's social station kept Barbados peaceful, idyllic, law-abiding, and safe from social implosion. This narrative suggests everyone kept a straight back, a stoic face, accepted hardship, prayed for deliverance, and passed respect around. Once community residents moved beyond mutually needing each other's benevolence and assistance, it is suggested they have lost the foundation for the values of the village. These values are often discussed in isolation from the wider socio-economic and cultural conditions that reproduce them. Those who have migrated to the middle and upper classes or have never experienced the grind of a working class existence, these persons often wonder, what has become of these values? Have these values migrated with those who left the working class? We seem incredulous or assume working class families do not assist each other as generations ago. They do. But now there are many interclass linkages where middle-class families are supporting working-class relatives and vice versa. All classes, engage in mutual support, but the middle and upper classes have institutionalized social reciprocity and mutual assistance with more resources to do so. I have created a theory, a model, and I theorize that the middle and upper classes are able to bequeath, that is to give to their children and their relatives, what I have termed the socio-economic dynamics of class capital coherence, or sometimes I describe it as the 4 C's. In this model, this has 4 interconnected dimensions. So take a look at the diagram. And when they work together, they can yield the 4 C's of success: class, capital, connections, and confidence. When they work together, and these are resources that are more available to the elites, upper middle class and upper middle class. They work together to produce an internal, self-replicating network of social and economic benefits and relation, but each has an autonomous dimension. So class has an autonomous dimension: capital, connections, confidence. But when they work together, the individual or the groups who are placed here receive great benefits from that exchange of dynamics, that the mutually reinforcing dynamics. Persons who are part of these informal and powerful networks attend similar schools, participate in similar recreational, social, and sports clubs and organizations, enjoy familiar access to employment exposure, and receive letters of recommendation from well-placed persons in the society. They acquire the required social skills, mentoring, and experience to navigate the increasingly complex arena of employment, career, and social spaces. These networks of connections lead to a greater sense of value and social validation, so that those who participate may experience a feeling of belonging. And I would love to take a lot of the young people who are involved in crime and plug them into here and see what these look like for them. It would be very interesting. For those who participate in the 4 Cs, their sense of self-worth is strengthened, and they intuitively feel they have a stake in the society. Often, when persons comment on the plight of working class communities, the 21st century villages, they ignore the fact that members of those communities cannot penetrate or enjoy similar dividends from the interactions of the 4 Cs of the capital class coherence. Some members of the middle and upper classes may provide salves to their conscience with charity events, handouts, well-publicized acts of public generosity, and sincerely hope the working class will acquire the social and economic skills to survive, so that they, the working class, will not be a burden to the wider society or to the members of the middle and elite classes. This is necessary so that we can live our improved lives in peace, with prosperity and crime-free. Yet, the entire society is interconnected. Without government's policies to improve social and economic services for the most vulnerable, to shape the contours of what the goals of the society are, the alienation and disruption of trying to make life bearable will prove burdensome for all of us, and not only the ones directly affected. Isolated individuals, or let me say that differently, isolated individual success stories of women or men beating the odds and managing to transcend a working class existence should not be glamorized and portrayed as the norm. These should not be held up as examples of what could happen if working class person would only apply themselves and pull themselves up. Without policy interventions, a few persons will escape the grind of a working class existence, but far more will be ground down, unable to access or exploit the more favorable dividends that flow from the capital class nexus I just showed you. Through policy interventions, the government has a responsibility to create more equitable conditions to enable boys and girls, young women and young men to be hopeful about their future in our society, irrespective of whether they live in Apes Hill Villas or Ashdean Village. This unrelenting focus on the glories of the past is unhelpful and even dangerous. As I have stated previously, not only is the past never available, any of you who have been able to go back and pull up anything from your past, let me know the secret. As I've stated previously, not only is the past never available, its romanticization seriously obscures the problems it bequeaths to the present, because first of all, it prevents us from looking at what we have to deal with. So every time we go and we say, I remember when, that was then. We have to look at now. Commentators may look back with as much nostalgia as they can create. It is foolhardy to suggest returning to any semblance of that earlier period is meaningful. There are many features of Barbados's contemporary realities and social ills which the country could do without. However, in almost every dimension of our current 21st century existence, the conditions of living have improved greatly for the vast majority of Barbadians. The problematic issues that are being thrown up indicate a worrying trend of social alienation and economic hardship for some, and it is the responsibility of the government and citizens to address this, and that responsibility cannot be reduced to a reaffirmation of the values of the village. In this nostalgic backward longing for the values of the village, commentators are ignoring the social and economic effects on young people of the 2.5 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. I assume the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training is actively tracing all the 3rd to 5th formers who were enrolled in the nation's 23 secondary schools in March 2020. Anybody who was 13 in 2020 is now 15. Anybody who was 15 is now 17. And I don't know that all of them made it back to school. We need to determine how many disappeared from the educational system. All students were under grave stress, but that teenage cohort represent a very high-risk, vulnerable group. What percentage of them returned to school? What percentage of them fell through the cracks of inadequate ICT support infrastructure? School closures, parental job losses, and other social and economic pressures. How many? What are they doing now? Where are they in 2022? The pandemic was visited on everybody across the world, but we in Barbados and the Caribbean, but here in Barbados, we have to deal with the effects. The country needs to know what percentage of these young people who were 13 plus and older in 2020, what percentage would have been lost to the educational system, and who would now need sustained interventions to reintroduce them to some form of education and skills training. Even though the country is now fully reopened, the economic and social pain introduced by the pandemic has not gone away. Many of the social problems the country is experiencing have been exacerbated by the pandemic. In April 2020, at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Prime Minister, the Honourable Mia Amor-Motley, established a Jobs and Investment Council, which was comprised of 6 committees. I chaired the Services and Creative Economy Committee. And on June 4th, we submitted our report to the Prime Minister. Our mandate was to advise the government on how to train persons to world-class standards in the delivery of goods and services. The committee accepted it had to advise the government as to the most effective means for stimulating the economy, revitalizing the society, and preparing the country for diversification and a reimagined future for work and life in Barbados. In preparing the report in 2020, the committee was already aware that some sectors of the society were already hard hit by the required closures and the widespread cessation of economic activity. And in the table on economic employment classifications, I highlighted the areas that were hard hit. The report identified many factors triggering economic and social distress. Chief among them were the vulnerabilities surrounding women-headed households. This was compounded by the fact that the Barbados Country Assessment of Living Conditions in 2010 in a national representative sample revealed that female-headed households accounted for 50.7% of total households in Barbados. The 2016 Barbados Country Assessment Living Conditions Survey also revealed that approximately 60% of poor households are headed by women. There is a higher percentage of women-headed households characterized as poor. That is 21% of households characterized as poor are headed by women, compared to poor households headed by men, 14%. Those households would have been under stress for 2.5 years, and many will continue to experience various forms of disruptions. How many children and teenagers live in these households? A well-known feature of households headed by women, especially those classified as poor, is that they have a higher percentage of dependent children within them. The report also identified 7 factors that characterize the effect of the pandemic on the society that needed to be improved. And I've already mentioned the ones related to vulnerabilities surrounded women-headed households. I won't go through all of them, but what I will tell you on the last one, in terms of the report, all the training that we recommended, we stated it should satisfy the mandate to produce training of world-class standards by ensuring that all educational training institutions meet the registration or accreditation standards of the Barbados Accreditation Council. So while Barbados is making strides in emerging from the economic malaise introduced by the COVID-19 pandemic, the country has not focused sufficient attention on the deeply disruptive social dimensions of the lockdowns and the stresses imposed on young people and their parents, especially single mothers and out-of-work fathers. I maintain that the country is experiencing greater social dislocations post-COVID lockdowns, which have been exacerbated by developments during the pandemic. Analyses have focused narrowly on the absence of morals, the erosions of the values of the village, and insufficiently on a comprehensive overview of the economic and social trauma visited upon this country by the pandemic. The most vulnerable always find it more difficult to cope. Now, people who break the law have to face the consequences. They have to. However, long-term solutions lie in preventative rather than punitive measures. As I've stated several times before, as much as our societies need prisons, detention centers, safe houses, metal detectors, expanded police patrols, whenever someone is incarcerated, that is locked up, whenever a woman has to be put into a safe house, whenever children are removed from abusive homes, or when schools use metal detectors to reveal concealed weapons among children, as necessary as all these measures are, the first action they reveal is that they expose persons already committed to using violence. The society is better served when persons do not resort to acts of violence to solve problems. So let's think of preventing social and economic alienation. Let us examine this aspect of the topic. Instead of advocating funding for research on the phenomenon of rising gun crime, I recommend that funding be provided for government ministries and departments dealing directly with communities. The Community Development Department of the Ministry of Youth Affairs, Sport, and Community Empowerment should be strengthened, and community development programs increased throughout all the communities in Barbados. These young people here, they end up with heightened self-esteem and self-confidence when they participate. And when you feel good about yourself and you feel you have a stake in the society, you are less likely to feel like rampaging and destroying. It's not an overnight solution, but it has to be built. I commend the government for the reintroduction of the 5-week summer day camps started on July 25th and operating in 43 venues across the country, or operated, because I think they're over. The introduction of a summer nutrition program is also commendable, even though there should have been greater consultations with relevant parties. These programs are highly necessary in providing support for children and parents who are experiencing serious stress. There is a lot of quiet economic distress among working families. 3 years ago, I reminded the government of its responsibility to have the best efforts of the nation's young people, the educational, social, and economic success that the country wants for them, be supported by sound social policy. The values of the village must be supported by government investing in providing social services and programs necessary for a rapidly evolving 21st century society. Why do I say the government and not civil society service clubs, religious organizations, or the private sector? They all have a role to play. The various institutions of civil society are all vital partners in producing the kind of society in which young people acquire valuable skills, develop a moral compass, learn the value of work, and committed citizenship. However, only the government has the political authority and responsibility to create public policy. Only the government has wide-reaching scope to create policies that can protect public values. Only the government can influence and introduce the policies under which public goods such as education and social goods such as cohesion and stability can flourish. And when things go wrong, the society don't call on the service club to come and deal with the crime in the area. It is the police force which is under the government. When people are injured, the private, who can go to private doctors will, but it's the Queen Elizabeth Hospital that experienced further stress. Again, 3 years ago, I advocated government investing in expanding the services provided by Barriteau, which, as you know, is Parent Education for Development in Barbados, which works to enhance family life through improving child-rearing practices. I was very heartened on August 10th to read the comment by Chief Magistrate Mr. Ian Weeks in admonishing warring parents that, and I quote, "The state needs to understand that Barriteau and a national parenting program are absolutely essential to return this society to a place of equilibrium, because we have too many people like you," he was addressing some parents in a court, "all raising children in battlefields. And then, 15 years later, we do not expect the same children to take up firearms. Who are we fooling?" I advocated upgrading and formalizing the structure and service delivery of Barriteau by providing personnel and resources. Barriteau and the Professional Association of Social Workers should receive greater government and private sector support in the education and execution of their mandates. An investment in the strengthening of Barriteau, in placing social workers in primary and secondary schools, is an investment in the present and future of Barbados. The prevalence of young men shooting and killing each other are symptoms of economic hardships and deprivation. Failed families, overburdened mothers, absent fathers, declining community and extracurricular programs in schools. We cannot blame the decline on any one sector of the society. It is our collective responsibility and our collective failure. Yet, government has an overarching responsibility to protect the public good. Barbados in 2022 is not Barbados of the 1960s. I do not believe the surge in violence is as a result of the evaporation of Barbadian values. I think Barbadian values, the values of the village, are no longer by themselves sufficient to guarantee all that is required to maintain social stability. It is insufficient to protect our young people from the massive digital dumping of all kinds of information, most of it useless and time-wasting, even though we recognize the importance of digital literacy. Along with that and the ICT infrastructure comes digital dumping. Our young people are bombarded by images and influences that did not exist a generation ago. The negative influences that have always existed are now exaggerated and broadcast across the world and directly into their young minds. The majority of parents are trying and struggling to cope with so many disruptive influences. The majority of children want to do well. They want the society to be proud of them. The vast majority of parents want to raise well-adjusted sons and daughters. For the ones who lack the skills to do so, we have to provide the support and stop criticizing them. Because when we criticize them, we behave as if the criticism will solve the problem. When we say that mother should know better what kind of father he is, without offering advice, the behavior continues. Investing in providing sustainable support to produce well-adjusted citizens is the best social insurance policy we can provide Barbados. There are some who believe that the government that governs least by spending less on social programs governs best. By now you will pick up I'm not one of those. I have no problem paying taxes if it is going to help support schools and police stations and the hospital and so on, because I am part of a community, the community of Barbados. That view that the government should not spend on social programs, that view often masks a desire to have government spend in other areas that they think are far more important. I want to caution policymakers in government not to be persuaded by that kind of thinking. Government expenditure on social programs is an investment in the economy, in the reputation of the country, in the future earning power of young people in the country. It is an investment in our collective well-being. Investing in social programs produces far greater returns than an investment in local and international public relations consultants to scrub the image of Barbados when the tourism product is endangered because crime is growing out of control. Make Barbados right for us, and everything else will follow. Investment in social programs produces far greater returns than an investment in security guards for schools and more prison officers or correction officers for the prisons and juvenile detention facilities. It would be to the detriment of the well-being of Barbados if we take the position that the problems of crime-ridden neighborhoods, the underperformance of far too many of our children in primary and secondary schools, the struggles, indifference, or inability of parents in raising children are all challenges that belong exclusively to those experiencing them. If the country truly respects the values of the village, then the country must do all within its resource capabilities, to prevent social and economic alienation. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Professor Barriteau, we thank you for that professionally presented, inspirational, comprehensive, knowledgeable, and thought-provoking lecture. It was greatly appreciated. We now invite our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Mia Amor-Motley, QC MP, Prime Minister of Barbados, to provide our closing remarks.
Good evening, the dear people of St. Andrew and all who are joining us in this another edition of the Ermie Bourne Lecture. I'd like to thank Rommel Springer for continuing the tradition of his predecessor, Mr. George Payne, in ensuring that this celebration of the first female parliamentarian ever to be elected by the people of Barbados continues. Similarly, I'd like to thank the most Honourable Eudine Barriteau, who has been a trailblazer in the area of gender equality in our country, and indeed in the wider Americas. I'm heartened indeed this evening by Professor Barriteau's recognition that merely harking back to the past will not allow us to build the future that we want or that we deserve. Indeed, a future that is not just stable for our economy or for our country, but stable for our families and for our society. One that we can live in and enjoy and know that there is equality of opportunity. I endorse Professor Barriteau's call for focus and investment in strategic interventions that help our society to become more cohesive, that will prevent the social and economic alienation of our people, that will allow us to build communities through strong community programs and support families through strong parental support as we're seeking to do, and indeed ensure that we are building all of those things together through the reform of our social interventions, in particular through the Ministry of People Empowerment. Truthfully, this is why during the period of time in opposition, we settled on the covenant of hope that defines who we are and what we stand for and what we will fight for. And we have come to fight for the right of ordinary Barbadians not only to get out of poverty, but to regain the lost decade and to ensure that we create that opportunity that will make each Barbadian family stronger. And in so making each family stronger, that individual becomes stronger and that community becomes stronger. We do not have the luxury of reversing the hands of the clock, but we do have the luxury of forging our future. It is our intention to craft a vision and to execute that vision in a way that empowers every Barbadian who wants to be a leader. Leader in their community, leader in their families, leader in their workplaces, so to do. And this is the vision that is necessary if we are to keep a strong and stable society and to have strong and prosperous families. And if we can do that, my friends, then yes, we shall make that goal that we have set ourselves to be world-class by 2030. We will not do it by looking back alone. We will do it by being informed of history, yes, but by forging a future ahead of us with the will, the discipline, and the creativity to be the best that we can be. Professor Barriteau, I thank you for your interventions this evening, and Rommel, I thank you once again for celebrating the pioneering work and the courage of Dame Ermie Bourne, our Barbadian who made that difference by daring to be different and by being that first woman to step forward and say, yes, I too can represent the people of my community and lead the people of my parish. This celebration through these lectures must continue to inspire us to go where others have not gone before and to make a way for all who cannot make a way for themselves. To the people of St. Andrew, I have spent much time with you this week, and I give you the assurance that that sense of alienation which you as a parish have felt, regrettably, for too much of our period of time since independence must be put behind us. And we will work with you to ensure that you truly embrace the future that this country has for each and every one of you, and that equally this country ensures that you are not alienated in the parish of your birth, and that opportunities and services come to you as is your wont and